The law often draws fine lines that can mean the difference between freedom and prison, and the Supreme Court just drew one of those lines in a case called Esteras versus United States. Here's what happened, and why it matters for anyone who's ever been on probation or supervised release. When someone gets out of prison early on supervised release, they have to follow certain rules. If they break those rules, a judge can send them back to prison. But what should the judge think about when making that decision? Should they focus on punishing the person for their original crime all over again? Or should they think about helping that person stay on the right track? In a 7-2 decision written by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, the court said judges cannot use the desire to punish someone for their original crime when deciding whether to revoke supervised release. The majority explained that supervised release is supposed to be about rehabilitation and moving forward, not about looking backward and seeking revenge for old crimes. Nine Robes uses non-partisan, everyday language to focus on the facts of what the Supreme Court is saying. Here, you'll find clear, concise summaries of every Supreme Court opinion, stripped of legalese and clickbait headlines. Each post breaks down the facts, explains the court's reasoning, and highlights the crucial details that often go unnoticed. It's not just about what the court decided, it's about why those decisions matter, to give you a deeper understanding of the cases that define our nation's legal landscape. These summaries are generated by AI. Be careful and consult reputable sources when in doubt. Edgardo Esteras pleaded guilty to conspiring to distribute heroin and received 12 months in prison, followed by 6 years of supervised release. While on supervised release, he was arrested for domestic violence. At his revocation hearing, the court found he violated his release conditions and sentenced him to 24 months in prison, higher than the recommended 6 to 12 months, citing his criminal history and a need to promote respect for the law. Esteras' lawyer objected that using retribution as a factor was improper, though acknowledged existing precedent allowed it. The Sixth Circuit affirmed the decision, and the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case to resolve disagreements among different circuit courts. In a 7-2 decision, Justice Barrett ruled that courts may not consider retributive purposes when deciding to revoke supervised release. The law governing sentencing, Section 3553A, lists 10 factors for courts to consider. However, the section dealing with supervised release, Section 3583E, only references 8 of those factors, notably excluding the retribution factor. Using the legal principle that specifically listing certain items implies the exclusion of others, the court determined Congress intentionally left out retribution from supervised release decisions. This interpretation aligns with the rehabilitative purpose of supervised release, as confirmed in previous Supreme Court cases. The court rejected the government's arguments that the omission merely made consideration optional, or that considering the nature and circumstances of violations inevitably involves considering their seriousness. For future cases, the court clarified that standard review principles apply. Unpreserved claims face a higher bar for reversal, while properly preserved objections receive more favorable review. Justice Sotomayor, joined by Justice Jackson, agreed with the main ruling, but emphasized that retribution should play no role in supervised release decisions, whether related to the original crime or the violation itself. Justice Jackson wrote separately to note that the court didn't need to define offense in the relevant statute, as the key question was simply whether retribution was excluded from supervised release considerations. Justice Alito, joined by Justice Gorsuch, disagreed with the majority. They argued that omitting factors from the list doesn't prohibit courts from considering them. It just means they aren't mandatory. The dissenters pointed to other parts of the Sentencing Reform Act where Congress explicitly forbids certain factors, noting no such prohibition exists here. They highlighted practical problems with the majority's approach. Courts must consider the nature and circumstances of violations and adequate deterrence, yet cannot account for the seriousness or respect for the law, concepts that often overlap. They warned this would create unworkable practices and micromanage how judges explain their decisions. The Supreme Court's ruling clarifies an important distinction in federal sentencing. When judges initially sentence defendants, they consider 10 factors, including both forward-looking goals, deterrence, public safety, rehabilitation, and backward-looking punishment, retribution. However, supervised release serves a different purpose. When deciding whether to revoke someone's supervised release, judges should focus only on rehabilitation and preventing future crimes, not on punishing past behavior. This distinction matters because it affects how courts handle violations of supervised release conditions. The court determined that Congress intentionally excluded retribution from these decisions, consistent with supervised release's rehabilitative purpose. This interpretation maintains sentencing uniformity. Punishment for the original crime happens at the initial sentencing, while supervised release decisions focus on helping the person reintegrate into society and preventing new offenses. For defendants, this means courts cannot extend their imprisonment after a supervised release violation simply to punish them more for their original crime. For judges, it means focusing on whether additional prison time serves rehabilitation or public safety, not retribution. The ruling doesn't create technical traps for judges, but ensures they apply the law as Congress intended, with appropriate review by appellate courts when mistakes occur. Find us online at 9robes.ai. That's the number, 9robes.ai. Like and share this podcast with friends that like to be informed. 9 Robes provides AI summaries of U.S. Supreme Court cases. AI makes mistakes. People make mistakes too. We genuinely do our best to provide you with the most accurate summaries, but our best sometimes includes errors.